Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Joey Francis, your life, love, and relationship coach. Thank you so much for joining me. This week we're talking about something I've mentioned, I think maybe 100 times, but I never actually structured it properly. This is something that, if you've listened to every episode, that I keep mentioning and referring to. And I actually took the time to write it out and construct it properly. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the dating blueprint. Or better yet, the blueprint method for dating. Now, before we even touch the blueprint itself, there's something I need to make clear. If you are not okay alone, you are not ready to date intentionally. So if you go and listen to episode 52, this is 53. I think this is 53. This is 53. If you go listen to episode 52, which my 1-year anniversary episode, you need the full breakdown. But here is the condensed version. A relationship doesn't stabilize you, it reveals you. If your baseline is anxious, restless, lonely, bored, that does not disappear when someone enters your life. It just attaches to them. And when your emotional stability is tied to the relationship working, you won't choose clearly. You'll choose carefully, you'll choose from fear, you'll choose from urgency. And a blueprint built on urgency isn't a blueprint at all. It's a panic response. It's one that you will eventually negotiate with yourself. So that's step one. You don't need to be euphoric. You don't need to be fully healed. You just need to be stable enough that if something doesn't work out, you're disappointed. Because, we'd all be disappointed if something doesn't work out. But the thing is, you're not destroyed. If you can't tell the difference between those two right now, I say pause this episode and go listen to 52. Because everything else we're about to talk about depends on that foundation. All right. Let's assume you're good. The first part is handled. You're not dating because you're trying to fix a hole in your life. You're not dating to escape your own baseline. We already covered that in the last episode. So now we're going to move on to step 2. And this is the part people don't say out loud because it makes the whole thing feel way more real than they want to feel. A relationship requires vulnerability. It's something that I spoke in earlier podcasts. And vulnerability is not some cute word people throw around online. Vulnerability is a trade. You are trading emotional safety for emotional depth. Because the minute you let someone in, and I mean like really letting someone in, you're giving them access. And access is power. Power to love you properly, absolutely. But also the power to hurt you. And that's the part everyone wants to ignore. Because everyone wants the benefit of closeness without the risk of closeness. And you don't get that, not long term. So when I say, what are you ready for? As per episode 1 of my podcast, I do believe. I'm not asking if you're in the mood to date. I'm asking you if you're prepared to hand someone something dangerous. Not a weapon. Your heart. Because once you care, you can't pretend you don't. Once you're attached, you can't negotiate your way out of feeling. And if you're not ready to accept that reality, what happens? You keep people at arm's length. This is where a lot of you get stuck. You date, you talk, you hang out, you see each other, but it never progresses past a certain point. And that point is different for everybody. For one person, that point is physical. They won't allow deeper intimacy, so they keep it casual, they keep it surface, they keep it fun. For another person, it's emotional. They might spend time with you, laugh with you, sleep with you, text you every day. But the second something gets real, The second it starts to move into relationship territory, you feel the wall. Not because they don't like you, because they're scared of what happens if they let you matter. And I want you to really think about how common that is. How many people do you know, or maybe you've been this person, maybe you are this person who stays in this half relationship zone where it's close enough to feel something, but not close enough to risk something. Because risk is not the problem, not effort, not compatibility, risk. And the reason is always the same underneath. Even if people dress it up differently, they're scared of being hurt, they're scared of being abandoned, they're scared of ending up alone again. So instead of fully letting someone in, they control proximity. They allow closeness in small doses. They ration it. They let the relationship touch the edges of their life, but they don't let it near the center. And you can't build anything real like that, because at some point a relationship asks a question, not verbally, but structurally. It asks, are we doing this? Or are we just hanging out until one of us disappears? And if someone isn't ready, they will always choose the version that keeps them safe. They'll choose ambiguity. They'll choose, let's just see. They'll choose, I'm not sure. They'll choose anything that lets them avoid the moment where they have to admit, if I let this become real, I may lose it. And again, I'm not judging that. That fear is a very human trait and feeling. But you need to understand what it does. It creates a ceiling. And once you hit that ceiling, the relationship doesn't grow anymore. It just repeats. Same conversation, same level of depth, same pattern, same closeness, same distance. It becomes a loop. And one person usually feels it before the other. One person starts thinking, why do I feel like we're stuck? Why does it feel like we never cross a certain line? Why do I feel close, but not chosen? And the other person will say something like, I just need more time. I move slow. I've been hurt before. I'm not trying to rush. And listen, moving slow is fine. Being careful is fine. But there's a difference between moving slow and building a permanent wall and calling it pace. A wall is not pacing. A wall is fear. So step 2 of the blueprint is brutally simple. Before you start deciding what you want in someone else, you need to know whether you are capable of letting someone close enough to actually become something. Because if you're not, you're going to keep dating in circles. You'll keep meeting people, feeling potential, getting close, and then stalling out at the same emotional ceiling every single time. Not because the people are wrong, because you're not ready to risk the part that makes love real. And once you understand that, you stop asking, why do my relationships never go anywhere? And you start asking the question that actually matters. How close am I truly willing to let someone get? Because that answer determines everything that comes next. So now we're here. This is the part people think they're doing already because everyone says, I know what I want. And listen, I'm not saying you don't. I'm saying most people know what they want in a mood. Meeting your standards feels solid right up until you're in front of somebody who makes you feel something. Then your brain does what it always does. It starts adapting. It starts justifying. It starts explaining things away. You tell yourself, it's not that serious. Or you can work with it. Or you know what? Maybe you're just being too picky. Maybe you're just judging too fast. And none of that makes you stupid. Again, it makes you human. But it does mean that a lot of people aren't actually dating with standards. They're dating with whatever they can talk themselves into. Whatever they can talk themselves into accepting once they're emotionally evolved. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the blueprint method matters. See, it's not about being picky. It's not about building some fantasy person. It's about getting clear enough beforehand so that you stop negotiating your life in the middle of a crush. So, as basic as it sounds, here, I'm going to give it to you right now. This is the exercise. Go grab a pen and a piece of paper. Get a journal. Get a notebook. Open up a document on Microsoft Word. Okay? You make one document, one running list, and you write down everything you want in a partner and everything you don't want in a partner. And when I say everything, I don't mean personality words. I mean real life. The things that decide whether the relationship actually works once it isn't you anymore. So, write the obvious stuff if you want, but don't stop there. Write the things people always forget to define until it's too late. Kids, money, lifestyle, values, how they handle stress, how they handle responsibility, how they handle conflict, how they communicate once they're comfortable, how honest they are when something is uncomfortable. The relationship with their family, the relationship with alcohol or drugs, if that matters to you. Sexual compatibility, because pretending that doesn't matter is how people end up in relationships that feel fine and quietly miserable. And you do not rush this. This isn't sit down for an hour and finish it. You keep it open because clarity doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces. You remember something from a past relationship. You notice a pattern in yourself. You watch a couple dynamic and it reminds you of something you refuse to live with again. You add it. You keep building it until it actually feels like it represents you. And when I say everything, I mean, imagine me being Santa Claus. And I said to you personally, if you build me a man or a woman, I don't want to presume, if you build me a person from the ground up, exactly how you imagine them to be, how they look, how they smell, the music they listen to, everything, and you write it down and mail it to me, I'll give you that guy. But that's not what I'm going to do because that'd be absurd and insane. But now you got a list that's genuinely detailed. You do the part now that's going to turn this list into the blueprint. Okay? Pay very close attention because at this point, you should have, depending on how old you are and depending how many lives you've lived and how many relationships you've gone through, you should have a fairly detailed long list. And what you do is you start at the top and you ask one question for every single line on the list. If somebody had everything else on this list, but they didn't have this being whatever line that you're on, would I walk away? That's it. Because that question forces reality. A lot of things you think you care about, you don't. Not enough to lose a great partner over it. And a few things that look small on paper, you feel instantly like, no, if that's missing, I'm done. And that's how you find your real standards. Not what sounds good, not what looks good, what you're actually willing to lose someone over. Because that's what a boundary is. It's not something you say, it's something you've prepared to live by, even when it costs you. So you go line by line. And once you're done, you don't keep the entire list, you delete the noise. Because if it is important enough that you'd walk away over it, it isn't important enough to sit in your head and become something you obsess over. And what you're left with is a short blueprint. The real lines, the actual deal breakers, the things that change your future if they're missing. And this is where people misunderstand flexibility. Flexibility doesn't mean you have no standards. It means you don't create rules for things that don't deserve rules. If it's not on your blueprint, you're allowed to adapt. You're allowed to decide based on the person in front of you. the context, the reality. But if it is on your blueprint, you don't do the math. Just to put it out there, just to go over this one more time. You have everything that you could ever imagine your perfect person being and having. All the things that you want in them, all the things you don't want them to have. And then you ask yourself, if they had everything else on this list, but this one thing, would I walk away? Now, let's imagine you wanted a woman who's blonde. So you look at your list and you're at blonde hair. Okay. If the woman had everything else on this list except for blonde hair, would I walk away? No, that would be absurd. I mean, hair color's not that important. Boom. Take it off the list. Just delete it. It's gone. Then you move on to the next thing. If this person used recreational drugs and was addicted to drugs, would I walk away? Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. I think I would walk away. Boom. It stays on the list. That's how easy this is. Now, granted, you might have to sit there and think about some answers. Some answers might not come as easy to you because, I mean, just going back to the drugs, right? Maybe you're okay if somebody smokes marijuana. Maybe you're not okay if they do cocaine or something along those lines. It's your list. Be specific. If you get to a question where it's like, yeah, if this person does drugs, would I walk away? Well, it depends. Well, what does it depend on? What does it depend on? Does it depend on the type of drugs? So if somebody smokes weed occasionally, you're okay with it? Boom. Write it down. Don't write down that it's okay that they smoke weed. Write down the specifics, as in, I don't want someone who does cocaine or meth or anything like that. Be specific. Leave that on the list. That's all you have to do. And if you're still thinking about something and you're still wishy-washy, break it down even further and break it down even further and break it down even further until you have literally the most detailed explanation of a thing. Because the more detailed you are, the better that foundation will be. You don't do the modern dating thing where you balance good against bad and convince yourself it evens out. Because honestly, that's what I believe people do. They date on a scale. If the good outweighs the bad, it's worth exploring. I've seen it so many times. And that sounds logical until the bad happens to be one of the things that should have ended it on week 2. Just because someone has more good qualities than bad qualities doesn't mean they're a good choice. If the bad is a deal breaker, the relationship is not mostly good. It's incompatible. So the blueprint isn't about making you rigid. It's about making you clear. So you stop wasting months trying to convince yourself that something that violates your foundation can still work because the chemistry is strong. That is the whole point of this step. You create the blueprint, you live by it, and you stay flexible everywhere else. And once you have that, now we move into the next part. Because what you want in someone isn't the full picture. You also need to define how you want to be treated. Because someone can check your boxes and still make you feel like shit. So now you've got your blueprint, the real lines, the things you're not negotiating. But here's what people miss. Even if someone technically fits your blueprint, you can still end up in a relationship that feels off. And the reason is simple. The blueprint we just built is mostly about who they are. The part is about what it feels like to be them, because dating isn't just compatibility on paper. It's the experience of being with someone. It's the atmosphere you live inside when you're around them. Do you feel like you can speak normally? Or do you feel like you have to word things carefully? Do you feel like you can bring something up without it turning into a whole event? When life is stressful, because let's be honest, life is stressful, does the relationship become the place you can breathe? Or does it become another thing you have to manage? That's what I mean when I say how you want to be treated. Not the cute stuff, not the polite stuff, the real stuff. The stuff that shows up when people are tired, when they're irritated, when they're under pressure, when you disagree, when you're not in perfect sync. Because anyone can be great when it's easy. What matters is what happens when it's not. And this is where people get confused, because they'll meet someone who looks right, but the relationship doesn't feel right. And instead of trusting that, they start doing mental gymnastics. Wow. Mental gymnastics. They tell themselves they're overreacting, or they're too sensitive, or they just need to give it time. And listen, sometimes people do need time. But a lot of the time, what you're feeling is your nervous system registering a pattern before your brain has words for it. So this part is you giving it words, not in some cheesy way, in a practical way. You're defining what respect looks like, what accountability looks like in real life, what emotional maturity looks like in real life. Because treated well isn't just someone being nice. Treated well means you feel respected when there's tension. You feel considered when something doesn't go their way. You feel like you can bring up a problem without it turning into a punishment. And that word punishment, it matters. Because a lot of people don't get mistreated in dramatic ways. They get mistreated in patterns. Every time you bring something up, the person shuts down, or they get defensive, or they flip it on you, or they make you regret opening your mouth. And slowly you learn it's easier if I just don't say anything. That is not a communication issue. That's a safety issue. Because now you're not being honest. You're managing the relationship. You're picking words. You're timing conversations. You're holding things in. You're calculating what will keep the peace. And over time, you start shrinking yourself so the relationship can stay calm. You don't even notice you're doing it until one day you realize you haven't been fully you in a long time. So when I tell you to define how you want to be treated, this is exactly what I mean. You need to decide what your lines are emotionally, the same way you decided your lines with the blueprint. Not a huge list, not a bunch of vague details. Just entries, lines. What behavior is unacceptable for you to live with long term? What behavior tells you this person isn't emotionally safe? What behavior tells you conflict is going to turn into chaos? Now, here's why knowing your own patterns matters. When you feel uncertainty in dating, a slower reply, mixed signals, distance, a disagreement, most people have an automatic move. Some people try to close the gap right away. They reach, they pressure for reassurance. They try to fix the distance so they can feel calm again. Some people do the opposite. They go quiet, they pull back. Not always because they don't care, sometimes because caring feels risky and silence feels like control. Some people try to manage the relationship like a project. They push for constant clarity, timelines, labels, rules, not because they're crazy, but because they don't want to be surprised. And some people act like they don't even care when they do. They keep it casual on the surface, but internally they're attached. Because admitting attachment feels like handing the other person leverage. That's not a diagnosis, that's just human behavior. And it matters because your default move can make you tolerate the wrong treatment. If your instinct is to chase, you can end up trying to earn stability from someone who's inconsistent. If your instinct is to shut down, you can end up normalizing emotional distance because it feels familiar. So the point isn't to label yourself. The point is to notice what you do automatically so you don't build dating life around that reaction. And love languages matter too. But I'm not talking about it like social media talks about it. Not mine is words, so compliment me. I mean, what actually makes you feel loved consistently. What kind of effort lands for you? What makes you feel seen over time? Because if you don't know that, you'll either accept crumbs because you don't want to look needy, or you'll demand things you don't even actually need because you're confusing intensity with love. So this section is about clarity again. Once it's written down, you stop bargaining with yourself. You stop normalizing things that quietly erode you. And when you're dating someone and something happens that hits, that familiar feeling that I don't feel safe bringing this up, that I'm walking on eggshells, that I'm doing the emotional work here. You don't have to guess what it means. You can check it against what you already decided. That's the whole theme of this blueprint idea. Written, referenceable, referenceable. Jesus, what's going on with my tongue? Referenceable, clear. Because if you don't define how you want to be treated, you'll keep trying to earn basic emotional safety from people who don't operate that way. And then you'll blame yourself when it doesn't work. So you define it, you respect it, and you don't try to fix it by being better. You don't try to prove your worth so someone treats you correctly. You just know where you stand. And once you've got both pieces, once you know what you want, as in the blueprint, as in your non-negotiables, the deal breakers, and what kind of treatment you won't live with, now you have something most people don't. You have a framework that protects you from getting pulled into situations that looks good on paper, but feels wrong in reality. And now we can talk about the comparison. Because this blueprint method is the opposite of how most people date right now, which is basically a scale. And that's where people get themselves into trouble. So, why does this blueprint method even matter? Because when you hear blueprint, it sounds obvious. It sounds like, yeah, okay, I get it. But it only becomes obvious once you compare it to how most people are dating now. Most people are dating on a scale. They don't call it that, but that's what it is. They meet someone, they start talking, the chemistry is there, the routine starts forming. And in the background, they're doing this constant mental calculation. What's good, what's bad, what's annoying, what's tolerable, what's not ideal, but maybe. And then they keep going as long as the relationship still feels like it's trending positive. And I understand why people do it. It feels mature. It feels balanced. It feels like you're not being unrealistic. The problem is the scale treats everything like it belongs in the same category. And the thing is, it doesn't. There's a difference between a flaw and a mismatch. There's a difference between something you'd prefer and something that changes your entire future. The scale blurs those lines. And when those lines get blurred, you start calling structural problems imperfections. That's where people get trapped. They aren't trapped because they're stupid. They're trapped because the scale gives them a way to keep moving forward without making a real decision. Worth exploring becomes the excuse. It becomes the language people use when they don't want to admit what they already know. Because worth exploring is fine when you're genuinely learning who someone is. But a lot of people use worth exploring after they've already seen the things that matter. They've already seen the inconsistency. They've already seen the avoidance. They've already seen the disrespect. They've already seen the misalignment on direction. But instead of treating it like information, they treat it like a negative point that can be outweighed. And that's how you end up with these relationships that are great in certain moments, but unstable as a system. You've probably seen this with people you know. The person is technically a good person. The relationship has good moments. There's chemistry. There's attraction. They go out. They laugh. It looks fine from the outside. But the same issue keeps showing up. The same dynamic, the same ceiling, the same pattern that quietly makes the relationship feel unsafe or exhausting or uncertain. And because that scale is running in the background, the person keeps telling themselves some version of, Well, guys, come on. Nobody's perfect. And sure, that's true. Nobody's perfect. But it's not the same thing as this works. A lot of people hide behind nobody's perfect to avoid the reality that something is fundamentally wrong for them. So here's the difference. The scale asks, does this feel good enough overall to continue? The blueprint asks, is there anything here that changes the entire future? That's a completely different standard, because once you're dealing with something that changes the entire future, you're not in the land of balance, you're in the land of direction. If the relationship is heading toward a wall, it doesn't matter how nice the scenery is for the first few miles. That's what the scale ignores. And the reason it's such a problem is because the scale doesn't keep you dating. It slowly trains you to bargain with yourself. It trains you to turn your own discomfort into an argument you have to win, instead of signal that you have to respect. At first, you notice something and you tell yourself it's small. Yeah. Then it shows up again and you tell yourself it's not worth making a big deal. Then it becomes a pattern. And by the time you're calling it a pattern, you're already attached. Now, leaving feels expensive. So your mind starts doing what it always does when the cost is high. It starts adapting. It starts normalizing. It starts reframing. It starts telling you this is just what relationships are like. That's how people end up living inside dynamics they would have walked away from immediately if they had seen them clearly in week 2. So when you have a blueprint, you stop needing to talk yourself into things. You're not sitting there building a case in your own head, trying to prove yourself that this is good enough because you don't want to start over. You're watching what's real in real time and comparing it to something you've already decided that matters. And if something shows up that crosses one of your lines, you don't go into mental bargaining. You just call it what it is. That's the difference between dating with intention and dating with hope. And that's why I keep saying a deal breaker is not a negative. It's a point. It's not a flaw you tolerate because the other person has other strengths. It's a stop sign. And most people don't treat it like a stop sign until they've already driven past it, turned it into a problem, and now they're trying to reverse the car back to where it should have ended. That's what the blueprint prevents. It forces the decision earlier while you're still thinking clearly, so that later you're not trying to be reasonable at the expense of your own foundation. And this ties directly back to the earlier parts of the episode. If you're not okay alone, the scale feels irresistible because you'll keep trying to make something work so you don't have to sit in the discomfort of starting over. If you're not ready to be vulnerable, the scale becomes a way to stay in half relationships where you can feel something without letting it become fully real. If you don't have a blueprint, the scale becomes your default because you're always deciding in the moment. And moment-based decisions are basically chemistry-based decision. So the blueprint method is the antidote to dating math. Not because it guarantees you'll never get hurt, but because it stops you from signing up for the wrong kind of hurt, the slow kind, the kind where you look back and realize you ignored that thing that mattered because you were too busy counting everything else. And that's why the blueprint beats the scale. It doesn't make dating perfect, it makes dating clear. So here's the thing. This is what I want you to actually take from this. The point of the dating blueprint isn't to make you hyper-selective. It's to stop you from living inside that mental fog where you're constantly negotiating with yourself. Because that's where people lose years. They don't lose years because they can't find anyone decent. They lose years because they stay open in situations that are already showing them the truth. And they keep calling it being patient, or giving it a chance. Oh my God, I hate that one. Giving it a chance. I'm going to go on a little side tangent here. A lot of my friends have said it to me in the past when I was dating somebody. You should just give it a chance. Because I would, obviously walk away, break up with them. And they'd ask me why. And I would say something like, something that's on my list of my blueprints. And they'd be like, really? Really, for that? Yeah, it's a line. It's a line that's being crossed. And they go, why don't you just give it a chance? And I was like, no. Why am I going to give something a chance when I already know it's not for me? That my future isn't going to be what I want it to be, being with this person. I've said it 1 billion times and I'll say it 1 billion more. Communication and acceptance. If somebody is telling you who they are, accept it. Don't try to bargain with them. Don't try to convince them otherwise of how they are. They know who they are. They're telling you. Accept it. And at times, people have told me exactly who they are. And I accept it. Okay, this is who you are. Not for me. And people said, just give it a chance. No, there is no chance giving. Because when we're just giving it a chance, it's just fear of walking away. The blueprint is just a way to remove the fog. It gives you something to reference when the feeling is strong, when the person is attractive, when the moment is there, when your brain starts getting creative. And that's the real enemy, not bad people. Creative self-deception. Now, there's one thing I want to say clearly because people misunderstand this. And then they do the whole thing wrong. This method isn't meant to make you live in your head. It's literally meant to get you out of it. You do the work once, you simplify it, and you stop obsessing. If it's not on that blueprint, it doesn't deserve that much mental energy. You don't have to turn every preference into a policy. You don't have to micromanage every detail of another human being. That's the freedom part. You're flexible where flexibility makes sense, and you're firm where firmness protects your life. That's what intentional means, not rigid, not I have standards as a personality. Intentional means you're not letting the strongest emotion in the room write your future. So here's what I want you to do after this episode. I want you to actually do this. Start to document. Let it be messy. Add to it over time. Then filter it until what's left is short enough that you can actually live by it without overthinking. And then the real test is simple. The next time you feel yourself getting pulled into that, maybe I can ignore this, you don't need a debate. You just check your blueprint. If it crosses a line, it crosses a line. And if it doesn't, you relax and let yourself be a human being with another human being. Because that's what this is ultimately about. Removing confusion that never needed to be there. Most people aren't that confused. They're just avoiding the cost of clarity. So if you want a different dating life, you need a different operating system. That's what this blueprint is. And once you have it, you stop dating like you're hoping. You start dating like you respect your own time. It's pretty much done, but I kind of have a story. This is a person that I know. And they do listen to this. What happened is, I'm just going to change up some details. This person has very strong values and beliefs. And I'm going to be very basic about the story. This person has very strong values and beliefs. But they promised themselves that 2026, this is my year. I am going to find a partner. And I said, be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. Maybe you should focus your attention on finding the right partner, a life partner, or something more specific as opposed to, I'm finding a partner. Because we listen to ourselves. There's a podcast about that too. We're always listening to ourselves. And the thing is that we want to be consistent. We want to follow through on the things we say. So she said, I want a partner. And she goes out and she meets this guy. She has a wonderful time. She's attracted to him. He's a great guy. He's a fantastic guy. Until they start talking. Because now this guy has literally the opposite values and belief system as she does. And when I say opposite, I mean literally 100% opposite. And you know what she says to me? I'm going to give it a chance. I'm sorry, what now? You're going to give this a chance? But like you've told me in the past how important your beliefs and your values are. And rather than, understanding like, hey, we had chemistry. He's a great guy. We had a lot of fun. I'm attracted. But the foundation doesn't line up. It's not there. She ignored it and dated him anyway. Trying to see past his different values and beliefs. And obviously it didn't work out in the end because it's not going to. But that's how important having a blueprint is. So you don't necessarily have someone like me. Although, if you want, you know how to reach me. You can go to my website, joeyfrancis.com, joeyfrances.com, and you can send me an email. You can send me a message, and we can talk if we need to, if that's what you're looking for. I can help you with that. But having that blueprint is like having like a little, the little angel on your shoulder saying, hey, you know what? This is one of those things that you've written down that you would walk away from. So stick to your guns. As again, being human, we want to stay consistent. Stick to those guns, be consistent, walk away from them. They aren't right for you. It doesn't have to be this, huge thing. It's, hey, listen, you're a great human being. And I wish you the best of luck in the future, but this isn't working. This isn't going to work for me. And you do not negotiate on it because it's on that list. And I mean, listen, there's always things that people have as boundaries, deal breakers, which I find hilarious because they still go by that whole scale method. Whereas there's things that they're just like weighing out the good and the bad. And if the person's more good than bad, the majority of bad doesn't matter, but there's always like one or two things that are like, no. This one thing, like for instance, someone who's a drug addict. A lot of people are like, no, if they're a drug addict, I want no part in this. And it's like on your list of non-negotiables, right? Are you telling me it's just one thing? Just a drug addict? And everything else on that list of your non-negotiables is like negotiable? Because I see it all the time. I'm sure you see it all the time. Either within yourself, if you look back in past relationships and you say to yourself, hey, I did negotiate on this. This is something that I normally wouldn't have bent for, but because he was so good looking, I folded. I did. I backed up. I backed down. Let's not do that in the future. Because you know what? At the end of the day, the relationship is not going to work out. Because if you do this exercise properly, you are literally creating the foundation for your perfect guy. The foundation for him, not everything else. Because again, the foundation, non-negotiable. Everything else, negotiable. And that's for you to decide at the end of the day. If somebody has everything on your foundation, obviously you still need chemistry. Obviously you still need attraction. But maybe, for instance, music is a big deal to you. But it's not on your deal breaker list. And then this person says, hey, I like different music than you. Okay, well, they like different music than you. Maybe you'll like, I don't know. Or maybe you'll just be like, you know what? It's not on my list. Obviously, when I was thinking with clarity, I thought that this won't bother me. And who knows, maybe you'll find out that it does bother you, and then you'll put it on your list. Because it's an organic thing. You know, as human beings, we are always changing and evolving. I mean, the whole idea of growth is changing and evolving while understanding why we're changing and evolving. That's life. It's about being self-aware. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling on. I already mentioned my website. You can buy my books there, because if you're not coming from a happy place, if happiness isn't your baseline, guess what? There's a book for you. It's called Fate is Bullshit, A Logical Guide to Happiness, as well as one that's called The Logic of Me, a guided journal for self-discovery. And with those two books, you can make happiness your baseline, if you're completely honest with yourself. And I guess I should mention this now. There is a third book coming. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a third book coming. Yes, there is. So stay tuned for more about that. Anyways, as always, I am extremely grateful to each and every single one of you if you've made it this far. I appreciate you more than you'll ever understand. If you don't choose your standards in peace, you will negotiate them in chaos. Till next time.